All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Adirondack Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management Year-End Partner Meeting. It's fun to see so many friends on the phone today. All right. For some reason, I am not able to advance the slides. There we go. So, as some of you know, I often like to start these meetings with a reading of something. And so this morning seemed an apt time to pull out my version of Sigurd Olsson, The Singing Wilderness. This one's traveled with me to, oops, can't see it, but a lot of different campsites and places around the Adirondacks. Sigurd Olsson is a great writer from northern Minnesota in the Superior Quetico region. And this chapter is called, aptly, The Coming of the Snow. The aspen and the birch are bare traceries against the sky, and the spruce and the pine are dark masses against the mauve of the hills, and the hollows are deep in leaves. There's a sense of expectancy, though, awaiting, and the rustling sounds of autumn are gone. There's a hush and a deep and quiet breathing after all that hurried and colored vibrance of the months just gone. And the ice on the lake has begun to secure the shores and the islands, and the woods are ready. And as the 0 hour approaches, an even greater silence settles down over the north. And then there's a moment when that silence can actually be felt. And then suddenly, there it is, the air is white with drifting flakes, and that bit of tension's gone. And down those flakes come, settling on the leaves, in crevices in the bark, on the lichen-colored rocks. And then almost magically, the ground's no longer brown, but speckled with white. And swiftly the whiteness spreads, and the earth is sealed, and autumn is gone. And now there's great activity amongst the birds and the squirrels. The chickadees and the nuthatches and the siskins are everywhere. And the squirrels are racing madly to finish their harvest. And there's a new excitement in the air. And that coming of the snow, it adds zest to my activities too. Now, finally, there's time for all those multiple things that during the feverish moving about of summer were denied to me. And to me, that's the real meaning of the first snow, not a cessation of effort, but a drawing of the curtain on all of those warm weather activities that take so much time. And the snow means a return to a world of order and peace and simplicity. And really, those first day drifting flakes, they are a little bit of a benediction and a bit different than on the day that they come than on any other time of the year. So as I sit here and watch snow out my window, I'm pretty happy about the snow. I would have checked yes on the poll because I love to ski. So I'm hoping those of you calling from up at Paul Smith's are going to get a good dumping so I can get out on my skis up there soon. But also because it's a really great chance for our Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program staff and all of us here to think about what we accomplished this summer and then to look ahead to what's to come. So that's what this meeting is about today. We're going to talk, I'll do a bit of introductions, and then we're going to talk about our summer field results, and we'll take a break after that and then come back and talk with you about our new strategic plan and this idea we have of building a regional dashboard where we could all contribute some very simple data, but to be able to show graphically what everyone across the Adirondacks is accomplishing in terms of invasive species. So we'll come back to that after our break today. So in terms of introductions, I think a lot of you know our team, probably doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, and you'll hear from all of our team members today. Becca, our terrestrial coordinator, and Brian, our aquatic coordinator, Sean on communications, and Zach, our conservation and GIS analyst. And we were fortunate to have 3 wonderful seasonal staff this year. And so you'll see a lot about their work as we talk about our summer successes as well. but it would not happen. It's not just about what our great staff are able to accomplish. It's really all about our partners. And as I'm sitting here looking at the gallery view, so many people on this phone call spend so much time to help reduce the impact of invasive species across the Adirondacks. We worked with about 40 different partners this summer, and many of you are all on the phone. None of this work would happen without all of our efforts collectively. So I wanted to just take a minute to set the stage about why this is so important. And some of you have seen these slides before, so bear with me if you have, but I love to have a little bit of context about why we care so much about invasive species in the Adirondacks. So the Nature Conservancy has done a mapping effort around the country to look at areas that are the most diverse and where species are going to need to be able to migrate to as the climate warms. And so the Adirondacks are one of these key places around the country. And a lot of that work is based on modeling about where species are going to need to migrate to. And you can see here as both our mammals, birds, and amphibians are all coming around those Great Lakes, they're really coming through our region. And again, that's why this landscape is so important ecologically. It's also important economically for all of the people who live here and for those who recreate here. So in the spirit of snow, I wanted to get just a little sense, okay, so what's happening in our Adirondacks, and particularly in terms of warming. And so winter warming around the country. Winter warming is this fascinating thing. We're going to hear more about it in February when Kurt Stager talks about winter warming on our ice and on our lakes and ponds in the Adirondacks. In terms of winter warming, since I come at it from the forestry angle, I'm always thinking about what's going to happen with these species that are really cold intolerant, but as our winters warm, they're going to be able to move into our region a little bit more. So the closest data I was able to get was Watertown. So I know it's a little outside the park, but bear with me on that. So Watertown has already seen winter temperatures warm 4.7 degrees in the last 50 years. Now, if you check no to snow on the poll earlier, then you probably think that's a good thing. 14 more days above average and above normal. And the thing that kind of scares me a little bit is 8 fewer nights below 32. So it's when we think about the temperature changing, particularly being a little less cold, there are some species like Hemlock woolly adelgid that really don't like to live where it's really cold, but as we warm, those species are going to be able to inhabit this area more. And so if you were at our Adirondack Invasive Species Summit in October, you would have seen this slide from Dr. David Orwig at the Harvard Forest. And if you look down to 2050, you can see that, so Hemlock woolly adelgid doesn't like really cold winter temperatures. Again, as our area warms, it's going to become more of a suitable habitat for Hemlock woolly adelgid and for many other species. And you can see there in the bottom left, by 2050, that's the red dots, our Hemlock woolly adelgid has really fully embraced our region. And then graph chart F there, map F, shows hemlock and really how much fewer hemlock we will have in this area. Now, that's if nothing changes. So it's true that our individual efforts may not be able to make a dramatic impact on climate change and our winter warming, but certainly many of our organizations are working on that issue at a much larger scale. But what is true is that together, the people on this phone call have the power and have already had the successes to be able to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and especially when it comes to invasive species on the Adirondacks. And so I am just delighted to now turn this over to some of the APIP staff to talk about our great work this summer. And then also we will have our February roundtables again this year, where we'll have a chance to hear from all of you. And we'll also be using the chat today to find out about some of your summer successes. So over to you, Becca.
Well, thanks, Tamara, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about our summer 2022 terrestrial invasive species highlights. So when I think about our terrestrial work, I really think about three cornerstones, excuse me. So I'm going to kind of break my talk up into those three groups. And the first group is our terrestrial early detection and rapid response, or EDRR crew. This is a crew of 4 that we contract each year from Invasive Plant Control. And they're led by one New York State pesticide applicator. This year applicator is Vance, you can see him in green there, and 3 apprentices who are pictured there in the orange shirts. This year we had these folks on staff for about 14 weeks, from June 20th till September 14th. And the amount of work these guys get done in 14 weeks always amazes me. So this year they were able to assess over 1,800 sites. And of those 1,800 sites, they were able to treat about 500 of them. And most of those treatments are chemical treatments, but that does include some mechanical treatments as well. Now we've been contracting with these folks for quite a while. And what's really, really cool is that 700 of those 1,800 assessments no longer had the target plant observed. So that really shows how effective our past treatments have been at removing these invasive species. Now these folks do a lot of our herbicide work, and that work can't be done in the rain. So once we get towards the end of the season, any rainy day, this crew actually goes up and works on the Whiteface Veterans Memorial Highway and hand pulls invasive species that threaten the rare, threatened, endangered species up there. And this year, these folks pulled 10 contractor bags of invasive species. And it is miserable work up there, but it's very, very important work. Now, the next group of folks, if I can get our slides to advance here, are our seasonal staff. And as Tamara mentioned, we were very fortunate to have 3 seasonal staff this summer. So I'm going to talk about 2 that worked for me this summer. And then in a moment, I'm going to talk about our 3rd, who was supervised by Zach. So we've had an invasive species management steward in one iteration or another for about a decade now. And this year we were very fortunate to have Becca Tamagna, who's pictured in the top there, as our invasive species management steward. And her real role is to visit as many New York State DEC administered campgrounds as she can and to manage and survey the invasive species at them. We're also fortunate to have Adelia Baker in the bottom there join us for her 3rd summer, which was amazing, as our invasive species assistant. So together, these 2 surveyed and managed invasive species at 42 New York State DEC administered campgrounds. And that is all of the land-based campgrounds, as well as some of the water-based ones as well. They also visited over 110 recreational access sites, such as boat launches and trailheads, and surveyed and managed invasive species at those as well. And really, Adelia also helped survey and manage early phenological species that are out in bloom before our crew gets here. They also hosted and assisted with educational events. So a great example of that was Adelia actually helped us host an event where we took some partners out and we taught them how to identify and manage invasive species in the field. They conducted a bunch of landowner outreach and much, much more. Just briefly, before I talk about our forest pest research assistant, I want to highlight the work that our invasive species management stewards have done. So that role that Becca Tamagna had, our invasive species management steward, we've had in sort of one iteration or another since 2012. And if you look at this figure, we have the years across the x-axis. On the left y-axis, we have the number of plants removed, which is represented by those green bars. And on the other x-axis, we have the percent of campgrounds invaded, which is that black bar. So if we look at 2012, the campground steward removed almost 70,000 plants, and that blue dot, that blue star, excuse me, denotes that they weren't able to remove them all. So the invasive species management steward was out there, they removed 70,000 plants, but couldn't get them all. Compare that to 2022, we removed just under 6,400 plants. There's a small caveat on that yellow star. There is one relatively large site that we have stepped away from managing because the adjacent land is heavily invaded. And that accounts for about 4,000 plants, but still that downward trend is incredible to look at, and it highlights how important this work is and just how much garlic mustard we've been able to remove from the landscape. I mentioned we had a 3rd seasonal this year, so we're very fortunate to be able to hire a forest pest research assistant, and Zach supervised this position. And we were lucky to have Meg and Grega join us for our 2nd season. It's always great to have folks back summer after summer. So Megan surveyed 60 sites for hemlock woolly adelgid, spotted lanternfly, balsam woolly adelgid, beech leaf disease, or jumping worms throughout the summer. She also monitored 17 traps for emerald ash borer and spotted lanternfly, and those traps needed to be checked every other week, so there's quite the time commitment there. She also assisted Zach with his knotweed, eDNA, and avid research, which he'll be talking about in a moment. I'm sorry, the slide jumped forward on me. And she also assisted with our hemlock woolly adelgid treatments. Not really the third cornerstone are our volunteers, and I really want to highlight our forest pest hunters. These are folks who go out and survey for forest pests throughout the season. We kicked off forest pest hunters in 2020, and we relaunched the hemlock woolly adelgid portion of that project over the winter. So in mid-February, we hosted a webinar and some guided field trips, and we ran that program through early April. Throughout that time, volunteers adopted 114 trails. They entered over 400 observations into IMAP invasives and donated over 400 hours of their time. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk about beech leaf disease, which is a new forest pest to our PRISM. It was first detected by DEC this summer, and we wanted to get our volunteers out looking for that as well. So we kicked off Forest Pest Hunters Beech Leaf Disease Edition in September and ran that program through the end of October. It was a really short but busy season, and volunteers adopted 33 trails. They entered over 100 observations into IMAP invasives and donated over 100 hours of their time. So all told, volunteers donated over 500 hours out there looking for forest pests, and that is just huge. So a big thank you to our volunteers. I'm going to pass things off to Zach in a minute here, but I do want to talk about two species that are new to our PRISM and let you folks know a little bit about how to identify them before we move on. So the first species is one I just mentioned, beech leaf disease. Now, this was first detected by DEC staff in Herkimer County in June. And when we're out looking for this species, and I will note that there are a lot of really common lookalikes. So if you're going to go survey for the species, please visit our website or DEC's website. You can even download that survey protocol for the Forest Pest Hunters program that I just talked about. And that actually has a really great guide of what to look for with pictures, as well as pictures of all the lookalikes. So if you're going to go survey for this pest, what we tell folks to do is walk to a stand of beech and kind of look up. And what you're really looking for are these dark bands between the leaves that you can see in that top right picture. Other things you can look for are leaf curling, which you can see in that bottom picture, as well as a shift in texture. So beech leaves typically are very papery when you feel them, but in leaves that are infested with beech leaf disease, they almost have a leathery or rawhide-like texture. It's very different. I do want to note that a lot remains unknown about this species. So we do believe that it's associated with a nematode, whose scientific name is listed there below beech leaf disease. But we don't really know for sure how it spreads. So the more information that we can gather about the species, the better. So if you're out and you see this species, please, please, please report to IMAP. The other species I want to talk about is wineberry. This species was also new to our PRISM this summer. It was first detected in June on Long Island and Lake George, and that is the only place we found it so far. This plant looks very, very raspberry-like. There's a raspberry-like growth form, and it also has a raspberry-like fruit, which you can see in that middle picture there. However, the fruits tend to be larger. The leaves are deeply divided into three leaflets, which you can see on the top. The edges of those leaves are going to be toothed, and it's also going to be light green above, but very white when you flip it over. Like I said, it looks a lot like raspberry. So how do we tell that apart? Well, we're going to look at the stems, and if they're covered in those fine red hairs we can see in that bottom picture, we know it's wineberry. Those fine red hairs can also be found on the flowers as well as the fruits, which you can see in that middle picture. Now, without further ado, I will pass things off to Zach.
Thanks, Becca. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see a lot of familiar names and faces today, and also some new ones as well. I'm going to kick off my slides by providing an update on hemlock woolly adelgid in our region. This is one of our priority forest pests that we spend a lot of time surveying for and also managing. So just as a quick overview, unfortunately, as many of you may already know, hemlock woolly adelgid is present within the Adirondack PRISM. It was first detected in our region in 2017 on Prospect Mountain in Lake George. And in 2020, a larger infestation was found along the eastern shore near the Glen Island campground. Since that time, several additional satellite infestations have been detected, including a few new detections this field season in 2022. So I want to highlight those new finds, which are Hearthstone Campground on the western shore of the lake. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, as well as Long Island in the center of Lake George, Mohican and Turtle Islands near Northwest Bay and the Tongue Mountain Peninsula, and a small infestation located on private property in the southeastern shoreline. At this time, HWA is still believed to be restricted to just the Lake George region within our PRISM, but we are continuing to look for it in many other places. Many of the infestations featured on this slide, particularly those located on DEC land, are currently under some form of active management. The APIP team continues to work on HWA management on Dome Island, which is a Nature Conservancy owned property located basically in the center of Lake George. Hemlock woolly adelgid was first detected on Dome Island in 2020, and management efforts began that same year. In 2022, we completed our third season of control work, and we sprayed 505 trees with a basal bark treatment of metocloprid-based insecticide, and performed an injection treatment of trees, approximately 22 trees along the shoreline. This is an ongoing management project. We expect control to continue in 2023, where we'll focus more intensively on injection of trees along the shoreline of Dome Island. Hemlock is a significant component of the forest on this island. It comprises over 60% of the forest, and we've treated about 56% of all hemlock trees to date. I do want to acknowledge our partners at the Lake George Land Conservancy, who have helped us out significantly with this management project. Without them, we would not have been able to treat nearly as many trees as we have so far. I also do want to highlight there are additional regional management efforts ongoing within the Lake George watershed by various partner organizations. So the New York State Hemlock Initiative recently released 2,000 Laricobius nigrinus beetles on the eastern shore of the lake near Paradise Bay. Laricobius is one of 2 biological controls currently being researched for control of hemlock woolly adelgid in New York State. 2,000 insects were released in October, and the hope is that with successive releases over time, these biocontrols will be able to establish a self-sustaining population that will provide long-term control and suppression of HWA. Additionally, New York State DEC continues to lead a variety of chemical treatment projects at different sites throughout the watershed. This fall, DEC applicators performed treatments at the Buck Mountain Trailhead, Hearthstone Campground, and both Mohican and Turtle Islands. And these chemical treatments covered approximately 53 acres of DEC administered lands. And lastly, in the HWA world, I just wanted to briefly highlight or tease a project that we worked on this spring in collaboration with the New York State Hemlock Initiative, which was the use of eDNA as a sampling tool for hemlock woolly adelgid. So the New York State Hemlock Initiative is currently leading research into the use of environmental DNA as a novel early detection tool to help assist us with our early detection and rapid response efforts for HWA. So our team selected 25 locations around the Lake George watershed at varying distances from known occurrences of HWA, where we collected branch samples that will be analyzed in a laboratory for the presence of hemlock woolly adelgid DNA. The whole overarching goal of this research project is basically to assess the sensitivity of this detection tool. Laboratory analysis is currently underway, and we hope to be able to share the results of this effort very soon. Now I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and provide highlights from a few of our terrestrial research projects from this field season. And I'll begin with an overview of AVID, or Assessing Vegetation Impacts from Deer. This is an established monitoring protocol that's used to evaluate the browse impacts of white-tailed deer on native vegetation. And it involves 2 different monitoring techniques, one that utilizes woody vegetation and one that utilizes wildflowers. So you might be asking yourself, why is an invasive species management program monitoring browse impacts from deer? And the answer to that is that deer are one of several known associated stressors that can actually exacerbate terrestrial invasive plant infestations. And the way that this happens is that deer will preferentially browse on native vegetation in a forest, essentially what is most tender and delicious for them, and they will often avoid the invasive vegetation. And over time, as native vegetation is browsed, creates voids in the forest understory that are infilled by the undesirable invasive vegetation. And over a long period of time, this can actually change sort of the successional trajectory of a forest from that of a diverse assembly of native plants to an ecosystem that's dominated more by invasive species. And it can actually impact regeneration of forests over time. So the APIP team advances woody and wildflower monitoring at several different properties owned by the Nature Conservancy in the Adirondacks. For the sake of time today, I'm just going to briefly highlight our woody vegetation monitoring results. So we advance woody vegetation monitoring at 2 TNC-owned properties, illustrated here in these figures. And let me just walk through these quickly. So on the horizontal or x-axis is the years that we've been monitoring these sites. On the y-axis is the average annual height of plants that we've been monitoring over time. So both of these monitoring protocols involve marking and remeasuring individual plant stems over a duration of time to assess their survival and growth. And what you can see here is a comparison of plants that we've measured in closed and open plots. The closed plots are represented by the blue bars, the open plots are represented by the green bars. And essentially what we're trying to detect here is whether plants that grow in cover are able to grow much faster and at a better rate than those that are exposed to browse by deer. The idea being that if open plots have less growth, then deer are likely having a negative impact on the ecosystem. And what you might be able to suss out from these figures is that there is a slightly higher rate of growth in our closed plots. However, when we evaluate this statistically, there is not a significant difference between the two. So this suggests that at least at these two sites at this time, deer are not negatively impacting our native vegetation and therefore will not negatively impact our invasive species management efforts. Of course, these are only 2 sites in a 6 million acre park. The good news is that this is actually a community science protocol. So if this piques your interest and you'd like to become more engaged, I would encourage you to check out the website for this project listed on the slide. And you're certainly welcome to reach out to me and talk about it in more detail. And finally, I just want to provide some brief highlights for a new research project we kicked off this field season regarding the control of invasive knotweed. And the goal of this project was to evaluate chemical and mechanical treatment alternatives for invasive knotweed control. Currently, one of the most widely used control techniques for invasive knotweed is glyphosate-based herbicide. But as some of you may know, glyphosate is facing increasing regulatory restrictions, and we expect that there will be a day where it is no longer a tool in our toolbox. So we evaluated the use of 2 different chemical treatments or chemical products, imazapyr and aminopyrrolid, which is also known by the trade name of Milestone. We also did a pilot test using a mechanical control technique, that is the use of wire mesh, as you can see in the bottom of this slide here. So I'm only going to talk about the chemical treatments today just for the sake of time and provide a brief overview of the results. But for this project, we selected 3 infestations of knotweed where we established 1 square meter plots. We measured and marked all stems within the plots and then randomly assigned one of the treatments listed here on this slide. Performed the treatments in August and did follow-up monitoring at 2, 4, and 6 weeks after treatment to measure the percent injury or essentially control of stems within the plots. And here are those results. So on the x-axis, you can see all of our treatments that we deployed. On the y-axis, these numbers, this is the percent injury or control that we observed for each of the different techniques. On the left, far left, this is our control plots where no treatments were performed. Sort of in the center are foliar treatments, and on the right are our injection treatments. And what you can see here is that overall, the injection treatments resulted in a higher percent injury or control of stems than our foliar treatments. And of those injections, the most effective products were glyphosate and Milestone, or that aminopyrrolid, which both resulted in 96% control of stems. For foliar treatments, our most effective products were again Milestone or aminopyrrolid and glyphosate. And overall, these numbers were lower, but I do suspect just anecdotally that this had a little bit to do with the sensitivity of our monitoring technique and that these treatments might have been a little bit more effective than the data suggests. So we plan to return to these sites in the spring of 2023 to assess reemergence, and then we'll perform the same treatments and follow-up monitoring again in the summer of 2023. So this will be a multi-year project. We're currently working on a summary of this year's efforts, and we'll post that report to our website very soon, so that's available to partners. And with that, I'll hand things over to Brian to discuss some of our aquatic efforts.
Before we hand it over to Brian, just a quick question for folks to find out if anyone here has any questions for Becca or Zach before we go on. And then I think we're going to have a question in the chat too. Again, since we're not all in person and we can't go around the room today with all 40 people on the call, if you had a great outdoor sighting this summer and or a great success in your terrestrial work, please just drop that into chat. But you can feel free to click yourself off mute. Any questions for Becca or Zach about some of the work that they're doing? Any questions out there? Let's see. And did anyone have the most awesome wildlife sighting this summer? Anybody have anything great to share? All right. If you saw a moose, put it in the chat. I used to live in New Hampshire and I used to see a lot of moose. I have yet to see an Adirondack moose. So, Zach, there is a question about knotweed. Do you see that in the chat?
Yeah, I do. That is a good question. I would have loved to spend like 20 minutes talking specifically about that project. So I did.
We'll let you do that sometime, maybe in the spring.
Yes, I did omit a lot of those details, but yes, the concentrations of the applications followed basically the best management practices and label recommendations. So in the case of injections, they do often use 100% or essentially undiluted product, but with a much lower volume of application. And the foliar spray treatments utilize a diluted solution in accordance with the label. All of those specific prescriptions I'll put in the report that we're going to share out this winter.
All right. So I didn't see any sightings of moose yet coming up in the chat. I did see a sighting of moose scat. And I saw some moose scat way the heck up on a bushwhack I did way up in the high peaks. And I thought there's no way a moose was going to be able to get up there. A human could barely get up there hanging on to each tree as I was crawling up this cliff. But lo and behold, there was moose scat on top. So they're there. We know they're there. All right. So if you saw a moose, oh, yay, somebody, Tom saw a moose. All right, next. If you've seen the Loch Ness Monster in the Adirondacks, enter it into chat. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you for the aquatics. There you go.
Okay, yes, good morning, everyone. You can be on the lookout for all sorts of things, or like Aaron put in Champy, our Lake Champlain monster. I did get to spend a fair amount of time on Lake Champlain, but I did not see any monsters. I'm thrilled to be here talking with you this morning. I apologize for my froggy throat. I'm a little bit under the weather, but it seems like a long time since we were out paddling and swimming on our lakes, but it has not been forgotten. And we want to give some highlights from our summer field season. When we talk about aquatic invasive species at APIP, we really focus on three big areas: prevention, monitoring, and management. And our idea is that if we can do these three things well across the prism, that we will result in lakes that are healthy and do not have many of the negative impacts of invasive species. So we depend on working with all of our partners to do that. And if you look at this diagram, you can actually, if you have an astute eye, you might notice that prevent is slightly bigger than monitor, and monitor is slightly bigger than manage, because in our ideal world, that's how we would be able to allocate our resources and allocate our time, because prevention is the most important aspect. And at APIP, we do a pretty good job of trying to approach things in this way too. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, these three buckets. So first is prevent. And for APIP, that means a lot of education and outreach. So we are going out, talking with people in the communities. We're doing tabling events. We're doing trainings like here for our lake protectors. We actually added 2 new tier 1 species, round goby and starry stonewort, to our lake protectors program. These are species that are not yet in the Adirondack Prism, but we want to educate people about them so that they are aware of the pathways that they can move and hopefully prevent that. And also to be able to identify them. So if they did come in, we could hopefully detect them early and be able to successfully manage them. So, really, this is all about trying to put out the message of clean, drain, dry, and the importance that all water users, be boaters, paddlers, anglers, anybody who touches the water, we want to make sure that your equipment and gear is clean, drain, and dry, because that greatly reduces the threat of spreading it. And we could not do this. The really key people for this is our watercraft inspection stewards, our boat stewards, and we are super thankful for our partners like the Adirondack Watershed Institute, who you'll hear from in a little bit, the Lake Champlain Basin Program, the Lake George Park Commission, who manage some of our mini stations across the region. So they are critical partners, and they are the front lines and some of the most important things for prevention. And it's because of their great efforts and other people's that over 75% of our water bodies that we monitor are free from AIS. So big thank you to all of them. In the monitoring portion, we have several different things that we do. One of our key things is the early detection team, and we contract with Adirondack Research. I saw Ezra here on the call, and they hire a team that we work with to train to go out and survey lakes and do high quality mapping of where invasive species are present so that we can have this information for our partners and also for data. In 2022, we focused on Region 2, which is the green region, the western side of the park, the Black, the Racket, the Oswegatchie, and Grass watersheds. They were able to survey 42 lakes, and out of those 42 lake surveys, 10 of them, they were able to detect aquatic invasive species. One of these, Eurasian water milfoil in Forked Lake, it was a new detection that we were not aware of from our previous records. We are in the final process of doing the last edits to the report, and sometime this month we will get out a great report that we'll share with everybody, and it'll have maps and information and details about the work that was done. So we're really appreciative of our partnership with Adirondack Research. Another monitoring program is our Lake Protectors, started in 2002. So for over 20 years, we've been working with volunteers, partner organizations like lake associations, professional watershed groups, land trusts, communities, schools, anybody who is interested to be our eyes and ears out on the water. We have over 6.6 million acres in the Adirondack Prism, and there are thousands of water bodies. And so we cannot be at all of those places. So these lake protectors are our eyes and ears out there. This summer, we had 108 surveys reported. You can see these little blue squiggles are the areas that people outlined that they went and monitored. So you can see we have not only a high number, but good coverage from all the way up north outside of the Adirondack Park, all the way down south. 34 of these surveys detected AIS in them. And overall, we had 175 volunteers if you add up all of the work. So that is a great effort and a great example of, community science projects or citizen science projects. So when you add up the lakes that APIP staff monitored and the ED team, that comes out to 57 surveys. Our partners, people like the Adirondack Watershed Institute or our lake associations, did 46, And then we had 63 surveys completed by volunteers. So a good mix, and it really shows that it really takes all of us to do this. And when we add up the numbers over the years, this was probably one of our highest years ever. We had 165 total surveys on 144 lakes. Some lakes are big lakes, and multiple people will go out on them, which is great. And or some people just go out twice a year to a lake. So we still have a few of these kind of trickling in. So if you haven't gotten me your survey report, get in contact with me and I can give you the link to our form to fill it out. But overall, an incredibly successful year. Want to really highlight and thank the Adirondack Watershed Institute, their ALAP, their Adirondack Lake Assessment Program. We partnered with them and the work they're doing in the Lake Champlain Basin to have their volunteers and staff who are doing water quality monitoring also do invasive species monitoring. And that was really successful and helped us get a lot of lakes done. But because we are going out and looking at more lakes, we do find new places for AIS in water bodies. And so these are the lists that we've been able to compile so far this year. Lake Roxanne, which is outside of the park boundary. AWI was out there and they were able to inform us that unfortunately they had a very large infestation of water chestnut, also had Eurasian water milfoil, and we also found curly leaf pondweed there. So 3 invasive species that we were not aware of in that one water body. Next up is the St. Regis River and a small adjacent wetland right to it. We found the presence of European frogbit. And then Tracy Brook, which is a downstream wetland from Lake Alice. Lake Alice is a highly invaded wildlife management area. And it appears that some of the Eurasian water milfoil from there has transmitted downstream and established in Tracy Brook. Park Lake is an impoundment in Long Lake, right next to Long Lake. And in this impoundment right in town, we detected variable leaf milfoil. And in Forked Lake, like I said, right outside of Racket Lake, there was variable leaf milfoil that we knew about, that we detected again, but Eurasian water milfoil was detected for the first time in this water body. So that's kind of the downside of it. The upside is in 2022, we had no new reports for tier 1 or species not already known to be in our region. So no new species from outside the region were identified and reported. So switching gears to another monitoring program we call Lake Management Tracker, and this is for lakes and water bodies that are doing AIS management. So usually like hand harvesting or diverse suction harvesting. So they're trying to see how effective it is. And we worked with 5 different lakes, Upper Chattagay, Moody Pond, Racket Lake, Loon Lake, Friends Lake, and their local lake associations to go out and train them on how to do a point intercept monitoring, where we provide the technology and the training and the background. They are our eyes and ears out on the lakes. And here's a little pie chart showing that approximately 24% of the 900 sites that was monitored had Eurasian water milfoil. So this is a way where we are able to work with them. And this month I'll be writing up reports and getting back to each of them so they can track their progress over time. We also partnered with our sister PRISM, I guess, right across the border, the SLELO, and this is an aquatic eDNA, so the environmental DNA project, where we went to 66 locations along the 5 watersheds that drain from the Adirondacks into the Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. The Lake Ontario and St. Lawrence are some of the most highly invaded systems in our region, and these water bodies present a pathway that some of these aquatic invasive species could move up. So we were testing for 9 different species, plants and animals, and we're still getting some of the results. And it was, so we're still not completely have all the results in yet, but so far we have not had any positive identifications of inside the Adirondack Park for invasive for the invasive species we've tested. We did find some ones around the mouth of the rivers and a little bit further up where we had already known some invasive species like rusty crayfish round goby, but no new things. But we'll have a final report on that early next year, hopefully. And management, APIP has a couple management projects that we oversee. We've been doing some removal projects in Lake Alice for water chestnut. We've removed about 2.5 cubic feet of water chestnut this year. Unfortunately, that's been an increase from the past couple years, so it was trending up. And then in Lamson Falls, a wetland in Lamson Falls, we've been working at for over a decade now with European frogbit. And this year there was only about 10 individual plants, and over a decade ago there were 10,000 plants. So that one is moving in the right direction for us. We also had a project on Lake Champlain on our boat launch. This was our pilot year. So this is year 1 of year 2. We are working at 3 boat launches to remove aquatic invasive species with a dive team right at those sites to see if that will reduce the amount of AIS that is spreading from those boats, and working with the boat stewards to collect data so we can monitor the effectiveness of it. So we did 3 sites this year, Ticonderoga, Port Henry, and Westport. And next year we will expand to 6 with some funding from the Lake Champlain Basin program. And we're excited to build off what we learned this year and try to have a larger impact. So I just want to end with saying thank you in this photo from Lake George, where you see these people swimming in boats and houses and the pretty water, and just think that we are so fortunate to have these lakes and rivers in our water in the Adirondacks that we depend on for our economy and our recreation and our environment. And we couldn't do this without you, so we greatly appreciate that. And I think we are going to turn to one of our really strong partners, AWI, and they're going to give us a quick overview of the boat steward season.
Thanks, Brian. Yep, I'm going to turn it over to Bill in just a second. Becca, while we're getting Bill's slide set up, if you could give us a little bit of the SLF update. I saw that in the chat. That would be great. And we'll do that as I'm getting Bill up and set up. And then Brian, after Bill's talk, if you have any information about the Round Goby Lake Champlain Canal, that'd be great. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That means I can turn it over to Bill Brossow. And Bill is the Director of Stewardship and Education at the Adirondack Watershed Institute. So Bill, you can start to share your screen if you want. And I just, as we think about the invasive species work that we do here in the Adirondacks, certainly all of our partners' work is essential. I see folks from Lake George Association, Lake George Park Commission, from DEC across the Adirondacks. However, in addition to all of that work, the work of the AWI in terms of the prevention program is really key to our Adirondack aquatic invasive species success. So I'm really delighted to turn this over to Bill now to just give us an update. So Becca, first of all, before we turn it over to Bill, I asked if you could just give us a quick SLF update, and then we'll turn it over to Bill.
Yeah, so the quick SLF update from the Adirondacks is Megan, who I talked about earlier, monitored 9 traps. We had a partner monitor a 10th trap. We had no positive findings in those traps. There was a dead individual found in Warren County, and I believe Ag and Markets went and followed up on that. So short and sweet, it is expanding in other parts of the state, but we have not found any populations in the Adirondacks yet.
Okay, and that is spotted lanternfly. All right, over to you, Bill.
Great, and hopefully folks can both hear me and see my screen. Good. I always stress a little bit about this, even after 3 years of working on this stuff. So thank you. And first of all, thank you to Tamara, thank you, Brian, thank you to the APIP team, and certainly to all of you. It's an honor to be here. It's awesome to hear all that's being done out there. And excited to share a little bit about what we've been able to accomplish. And we is definitely it's a big W. It doesn't accomplish just by AWI alone. It not only includes the over 90+ stewards that we had this year, out on the launches on the front lines, but also every one of you. So I just want to just say that. I just want to acknowledge that two of my colleagues are also part of this call. Brett Wimsat, who's our assistant director, and Tom Collins, who's our education person, our specialists, and many other staff. So it's not just about me. Anyway, just quickly, I'll take a moment, much like Tamara did in the beginning, just a little context for those few of you that may not know a little bit about AWI, just talk about our program, and then I'll just get into some data and trends and some conclusions for this year that we've seen so far, knowing that we're still looking at the data and still will be coming out more information. So you can read the mission of AWI. I think it's important to say that we are a program of Paul Smith College. And how we accomplish this mission is through our 3 pillars, as I say, is through science, community, and stewardship. And stewardship in particular, first and foremost, it's about education. You know, it's where it begins. It's education of all people about our watersheds, why they need our protection, and how each person can be stewards of our lands and waters, and such. It's always think of it as being this kind of what, so what, and now what kind of thing. And then the second piece of our stewardship is actual hands-on, take the education, now it's the inspection, and hopefully that's the protection part of it. And yeah, so through inspections, decontaminations, we had about 60 plus sites this year. This gives a sense of within the green borders of the Adirondack Park where we're located. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this year we had about 90 plus seasonal watercraft inspection stewards out at these launches and some roadside locations. So looking at our data for this year, which I circled in red, I'll pause for a minute, as I always like to look at data over time, because start looking at trends and such. And then in a moment, I'll talk about a few items within the 2022 data, but just to show the trends and kind of where we've been since. This is just for the last 5 years, even though we've been doing this work for almost 2 decades now. And then specifically, you'll note, I'm sure this stood out, it's like the elephant in the room, was the number of boats with AIS was certainly down this year from 2022, and our both within our team, but also talking to partners, and saw it recently in an article in, I think it was the Almanac, talking about the Lake George, work down at Lake George, is that the number of actual boats on was less this year. That's certainly true. And labor shortage was definitely an impact for us. We definitely didn't have the same level of coverage that we've had historically. We're optimistic that we'll get better going forward, but it was an impact for not just AWI, obviously across the park, across the country for that matter. So that was impactful. With that said, and Brett noted this in an earlier comment in our chat, was that interestingly, just over 1% of the number of boats that were actually had percentage of boats with AIS, which was interesting. And it'll be interesting to see that going forward over time. The other piece of data that I just wanted to pull out is just decontaminations performed. We still continue to do awesome work from that point of view. Over 4% of boats decontaminated, and that's always a goal for us, and is to continue to increase that number, and provide that opportunity to boaters and make it as easy as possible for them to have their boats decontaminated. Yeah, the other piece of in here, this won't be a surprise to everyone here, I suspect, and even was mentioned earlier, but just looking at the last 5 years as far as aquatic invasive species interceptions and what we see most. Eurasian milfoil being the top dog there, curly leaf pondweed, zebra mussel, variable leaf, water chestnut, and the spiny water flea is kind of filling out the full 6 ones that we see the most of, and very few of others from that perspective. I just thought that might be interesting to share. And then lastly, that's all I had. I think I just want to again say thank you If there's time for questions later, certainly happy to. You could also correspond with both myself or any of my colleagues going forward and such. But really want to thank you and actually really thank each one of you for the good work, because definitely takes all of us, right? So just want to say that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. If there's any quick questions for Bill or for Brian, feel free to ask them. Brian, I don't know if you had any update on the Round Goby work on Lake Champlain.
I put a little thing in the chat, but I'll pass it off to Aaron, who might be able to give a more fuller update. But yes, lots of good things going on with Round Goby.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to give a little bit of an update. As discussed, there's been a lot of work going on this last year around Round Goby, and a lot of different partners working on the issue. Some of the different work that's been going on, as Brian said in the chat, is that the Lake Champlain Basin Program contracted with Scott George out of USGS to do extensive monitoring in the Champlain Canal for Round Goby. And the main goal of that was to try to keep an eye on the leading front of the Round Goby invasion and see how quickly they're progressing up the canal system. And so through a combination of both environmental DNA testing, as well as trawling and electrofishing, we have not seen the Round Goby go upstream of Lock 1 yet in the Champlain Canal. So it's still down, I forget where exactly that is, but it's still near the confluence of the Mohawk and the Erie Canal. However, it is likely, or the Canal Corps is going to be removing some of the tainter gates of Lock 1 where they are. So there's continued monitoring that will be going on this winter to see, once they remove the tainter gates, if the Round Goby will move upstream of Lock 1 while they're out. There will be continued monitoring of eDNA and the electrofishing going into next year, 2023, as well as continuing into 2024. I do want to mention too, well, there's the threshold, or it's essentially the TARP, or the threshold plan, that was created by New York State DEC and the Canal Corps, as well as some input from the Lake Champlain Basin Programs EIS Task Force, that created a plan for essentially, if the Round Goby reached this point in the canal system, these actions would be taken. And those include steps such as double flushing at certain canal locks, depending on where the Round Goby are, as well as scheduled lockages. And so right now, those double flushing, or this last summer, I should say, the double flushing and scheduled lockages took place at canal locks 1 and 2. Part of that plan is also that if the Round Goby were to get to a certain point in the canal system, there would be strategic lock closures as well, depending on how quickly they moved. This winter, the team is assessing the plan and will update it if needed. But with how slowly the Round Goby seem to be working through the system, I'm not sure how much changes will actually take place of the TARP. Another important aspect of the work is the education and outreach that's going on. So the Basin Program and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service set aside some money for a dedicated staff person that's housed at the Warrensburg DEC office. His name is Eric Reardon, and he's been working on a lot of different both one-on-one and presentations on Round Goby in the area. And so I did want to mention Eric's available for presentations on Round Goby and Round Goby work. If anybody wanted him to present to your organization, just let me know and I can connect you with him. Also, the DEC has created a few different outreach materials, a fact sheet on Round Goby, as well as lawn signs to be posted at access points. One of the main concerns is that Round Goby would get transported as a bait with bait fish. So we've been doing a lot of outreach on instances where there might be movement of bait fish. And then one other aspect of this that I just wanted to mention is that the Lake Champlain Basin Program has been working for over the last 15 years, Meg Moldley specifically, about trying to get an AIS barrier in the canal. And we've gone through, we as in the team and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has created a feasibility study for recommendations of what that barrier might look like in the Champlain Canal. And so now partners are currently trying to round up funds as well as develop a scope for phase 2 of the AIS barrier in the Champlain Canal. And so phase 2 will be taking the recommendations from phase 1 and trying to really develop designs that would lead to some sort of barrier in the canal, hopefully in the future. So I think that's a quick update. Happy to answer any questions either now or later or in the chat. Thank you again for the interest in this issue.
Excellent. Thank you for that update, Erin. So glad that you were on the call today. And it sounds like there's really good news. So it's not seeming to be spreading up the canal yet. And with the eDNA work that Brian mentioned, we're not detecting it in the watersheds on the western side of the Adirondack. So as I started out this call, it takes a village for us all to track and to monitor these species. And I do want to thank Bill, also find out if anybody has any questions for Bill, but just circling back to that, you know, when I talk with the other partnerships for regional invasive species management in other parts of the state, and I talk particularly about our decontamination work, what I hear is, you have decontamination stations? Not only, so the whole decon system that we have in the Adirondacks is really unique to this region. And thanks to AWI, the fact that you can decontaminate consistently year in and year out, 4% of the boats is just amazing. So if I don't hear any questions? And I'm going to actually turn it over to Sean. So let me go back to sharing my screen and get back to the right slide for you, Sean. And
okay.
get there. Nope, that doesn't. Okay. Approved. There you go. Up to you, Sean.
All right, I requested control. I can control. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sean Kittle. I am the communications coordinator with APIP. I started with APIP in May and I just passed the 6-month mark with the organization, so it's really exciting. The short version of what I do, I'll just give you a really condensed version to start off, is as comms coordinator. I keep the public abreast of the efforts of APIP and our partners, and I also help organize and promote all the trainings and events that we host and participate in. And there's a lot of other stuff I do too, kind of behind the scenes. Okay, let me, it's not letting me control the slides. Let me see here.
You could try requesting control one more time. See if that works.
My cursor is actually not, there we go. Let's see if it works now.
Okay, I think it's gonna work.
My cursor was kind of frozen there. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. And we're off. All right. APIP in the news. Okay, so I jumped ahead. There we go. Okay. APIP has been regularly featured throughout the year in various media, including online, print, radio, television, and via email newsletters. There's Brian being interviewed for New York Now at Lake George. Many news outlets like Adirondack Almanac, Adirondack Daily Enterprise, and Lake Placid News have been consistently publishing our press releases. And those press releases are often written in a way to not only inform the public about an upcoming event that's happening, but to also provide some context as to why APIP's work is important for the region. So there's a little bit more than just, hey, there's an event coming up. Every press release that we've put out since May has been run in at least one publication. I've been really happy to see that local media have also shown an interest in APIP and our partners' work. Beyond running press releases, we've had reporters attend and cover our events, and APIP staff have been interviewed for several stories over the past few months. And a lot of these weren't directly related to the press releases, so it's kind of nice because we're getting on their radar and they're starting to really pay attention to what we're doing. And you can, in fact, you could look out for a Q&A with Becca Bernacki in an upcoming issue of the Adirondack Explorer. Sorry, it should be changing and it's not again. There we go. Okay. In 2022, APIP participated in or hosted 45 events, and we reached about 1,880 people. The events occurred both in person and online, and they included trainings, partner roundtables, and all-day events. The in-person events were really a nice change of pace from the last couple of years when everything was happening online. It was really good to kind of get out and be in the field again. This is actually me showing some young students how to identify beech leaves during the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District event. So APIP staff also played an educational role in all of these events, sometimes tabling alongside of our partners and colleagues, and other times speaking about invasive species to various groups, organizations, and members of the general public. Among other efforts, APIP hosted several trainings for identifying and managing both terrestrial and aquatic invasive species. We spoke to lake associations around the region about aquatic invasive species and how to manage those species and prevent them from spreading. And we spoke at events like the Adirondack Lake Symposium at Small Paul Smith College, and we tabled at events like the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District's Waterfest, and the new Experience for All event at Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake. So back in October, October 19th, we held an event called the Invasive Species at Our Door Adirondack Invasive Species Summit. And that was held at Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake. The morning session for that event focused on hemlock and hemlock woolly adelgid, and the speakers covered the impact HWA may have on Adirondack forest ecosystems and the carbon sequestration potential of our forests. They also talked about how to manage hemlock to reduce these impacts. Speakers also discussed the potential for biocontrols to help in the fight against HWA. Then in the afternoon, the session focused on hydrilla. It included an introduction to hydrilla, the plant's current infestation locations, how its presence can impact the Adirondacks, and Adirondack hydrilla prevention programs. There was also a fascinating presentation by Dr. Susan Wild, who's the associate professor with the University of Georgia. She recently discovered a link between a bacteria connected with hydrilla and the death of eagles in the southeast United States. The event was well attended and had about 63 attendees. And if you couldn't make it, don't worry. We did live stream the event on Facebook, and the recordings can be found on APIP's YouTube channel. And I want to mention, if you have an event that you'd like APIP to participate in, please reach out to me. My email is sean.kittle@tnc.org, and I'll put that in the chat in a few minutes so you can all have it a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm really proud of this. This is a pretty big project that took up a lot of our fall when we weren't planning big summits and other things like that. This is our new field guide to terrestrial invasive species of the Adirondacks. This is part of the digital version that you're looking at. The print version is on its way and should be here soon. So this new guide replaces a couple of older guides that we had. And in the process of making this, we updated a lot of the photos. We rewrote a lot of the entries. Thank you again, Becca and Zach, especially for helping with that. And we rethought sort of just the overall purpose and intent of the guide. So whereas the previous guide, I kind of came in new and I was looking at these things, and to me, the previous guide seemed to highlight different invasive species, which is great. But the new guide really, it's intentionally based on a field guide format. So it really owns the fact that this is a guide that people can use. The idea is that the reader can use this guide to ID 28 terrestrial invasive plant and animal species found in the Adirondack Prism. So the guide, I'll just give you a quick little overview of it. The guide opens with a brief description of what makes a species invasive and an explanation on why it's important to manage those species and prevent them from spreading. Then it gets into how to use this guide, and you can see that kind of, if you can see my cursor right there in the middle there. And really the how to use this guide is kind of a primer on plant identification. It kind of goes over some familiar terms that people are going to need to know once they start getting into the specific species. And then you'll see here at the bottom part of the using this guide page, there is, excuse me, there's a color code that indicates each species' common characteristics and management strategies. This corresponds to these little tabs on the guide, so people can kind of flip through and see the little thumbnail type thing up there. And then in the back of the guide, we have some management strategies, and we have how to report an invasive species using the IMAP Invasive app. And each guide here, it just kind of breaks down each species. So what we try to do is give sort of a general look at the species, how you might see it if you're walking, through the woods. And then down in the lower corner there, there's sort of a more detailed view of a particular part of that species. So here we have the thorns, and here we have a comparison of the hand, so people can get an idea of the scale. And it goes through the basic stuff that most field guides cover. We have the native range, we have description, the habitat, so people kind of know where to find it, the threat that it poses, and then some management. And the idea is, hopefully if someone goes out, they could read the description and say, hey, that sounds like this plant, and then move on to the habitat and say, okay, that sounds like the habitat I'm in, and sort of narrow it down that way before they report it to IMAP Invasives. And it's a nice little fold-up brochure that you can fit in your back pocket. So right now we have a bunch of these coming. We're limiting it. You can order them online. So you can see here at the bottom, you can order up to 10 field guides. We're limiting it to 10 right now. I'm not sure how popular those are going to be. I'm hoping they are popular. If you do want more, please reach out to me directly, and we could probably arrange that. You can also download the field guide. It is live on our site right now at this URL. And so there is a digital PDF version. And I want to take just a second here to talk about our upcoming winter series. All of these webinars are going to happen from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. We have forest pest hunters coming up, Hemlock woolly adelgid in January. In February, I think it's going to be really interesting. We have Dr. Kurt Steger talking about some research he's done. You may have heard it on NCPR or other news outlets. But he did some research on climate change, ice, and invasive, not invasive, he did climate change and ice, and he's going to make a connection for us with how that might impact invasive species. And then we're going to do our native plant gardening webinar in March. And if you want to check out more events, you can go to our events page, and to register, you can also visit that page. And lastly, please mark your calendars for the February partner roundtables, Wednesday, February 8th and February 9th. We have the aquatic one on the 8th and the terrestrial one on the 9th. So thank you all for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. The guide is really exciting, and it's amazing that in addition to pulling off the summit, doing over 40 events over the course of the summer, we're also able to get this guide out there. So that is great news. I did promise that we would take about a 10-minute break. I do have some slides that'll be showing during the break from Department of Transportation and APA, who also do a lot of great work and are part of the whole overall invasive species effort in the Adirondacks. If we could just come back at 10:50, we'll come back and we'll jump right into the strategic plan and hopefully hear from you about this idea we have of a data dashboard. Okay, come back please at 10:50. All right, my watch says that we're at just a little after 10:50. I'll give people another minute or so, because as I'm looking at things, I can see that there are some empty chairs. Give folks a couple more minutes. For those of you who are on the call, just to give another minute or so. Anyone have any other great updates they want to share from this summer season? I still want to see the moose. All right. Well, I do want to
I
keep our
think the
meeting.
bear story takes the cake,
The
Tamara.
bear story.
Yeah, that was great.
And Becca, have your bears been back?
They have not.
That's a good thing, because once they get used to getting into the hives, the beehives, they sometimes want to come back.
Tamara,
Yeah.
Woodring, hey, just on moose, up at the lake, up at Chattagay there there's a road that goes behind what's called Parsons Knob, where some of the old iron mines were and all that area. My cousin saw on his way home from Tupper, he saw a moose trotting up along the road, and the antlers were, or he was tall enough that he tried to step off the road and whacked his antlers into a road sign trying to get out of the road. So but yeah, they're up there. We see the tracks all the while. I keep on saying, where are they all? Because I haven't seen one yet either.
Well, we know that they're there, and I think our chances of seeing one are a little higher than seeing Champion Lake Champlain. So
Yeah, probably.
all right, thanks everyone for rejoining. I'm going to do a little quick overview of our new Adirondack Prism strategic plan, and I'm pretty excited about it. And then, as I promised, we're going to talk about this idea of a data dashboard. Really, you are going to get a chance to give some feedback and some thoughts, even though we know a lot of this morning was listening to presentations. I do also want to make sure that Sean did talk about the fact that we do have our partner roundtables coming up. If you haven't put those on the calendar, those are really great fun. That's where we don't talk and all of you do. And so we do get a chance to really go around and hear from everybody about what they're working on. So hope you'll join us for those midwinter roundtables. All right, so on to the Adirondack Prism strategic plan. Many thanks to the people who were on our strategic planning committee. We had about 10 people on that committee, and it isn't just the committee. We had 43 interviews when many of you on this call were interviewed as part of that. And we also did a survey and 56 people responded to the survey. So really this plan is not about just the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. It is a collective plan for everything happening in this Adirondack Prism. The plan is available on our website, and somebody can put the link to that in chat. And I think some of you who are our regular partners that sent you paper copies, happy to send a copy to you. If you want, just send me an email and I'm happy to put one in the mail to you. There's great stuff in the plan. It really talks about the state of invasive species, but I also just love a little bit of the data about this prism, which is so different from other places in the state. So as you've seen on some of these slides, we are one of 8 partnerships for regional invasive species management around the state. And while a lot of our work focuses on the Adirondack Park, those northern parts of Franklin and Clinton County are also part of our prism. And in fact, we have over 12 counties, parts of 12 counties in our prism. And the whole region is home to about 221,000 permanent residents, about 123,000 who live in the park. So that leaves us, almost 100,000 other residents that are really up there in the northern Franklin, northern Clinton County region, which I just find fascinating. And then we have about 12 million people coming through here every year. So there's a lot of pressure on our resources here. We're home to about 100 invasive species, and that includes all the ones that we're tracking as we consider tiers 2, 3, and 4. So you don't hear us training on all of that. We're not able to monitor every one of those, but we do keep track of all of those species that are kind of in or around our prism. So I do want to talk a little bit about kind of what's changed since our last plan, because our last plan was actually written in 2013, so it's almost 10 years out of date. So we have new invasive species of Japanese silkgrass, which we found for the prism for the first time last year. Brian talked about a new population that we didn't know about of water chestnut right on the border of the Adirondack Park. And of course, you know about emerald ash borer and hemlock woolly adelgid. And there's just a lot of increased recreational pressure. And we know a lot of these species are spread by recreationists or by construction and people traveling through. But you know, there's a lot of hope on the horizon. I'm really interested to see how that watershed craft steward data is going to look over time. We have the new aquatic invasive species law for the Adirondacks requiring everyone to clean, drain, dry, and have certification of that or self-certification. We should be able to see some of the impacts of that come through in the data over the next several years. We've got great new tools, you know, as we've talked about the new eDNA research we're doing and some of Zach's work on different types of chemical treatments. We've got a lot of new things going on. And also here at APIP, we've got new staff, including having the full-time communications coordinator, that's Sean's position. So a lot of great things are changed in this PRISM as compared to 2013. And I know a lot of our partners have some new staff as well. We also here at the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program have this new logo that came out in 2020, where we're really tying ourselves more to the full statewide PRISM network. So when you hear and read some of the strategic plan, and as you hear me talk about it, you'll hear me talk about the Adirondack PRISM, which is the partnership, which is all of you. And then really thinking about the role that APIP plays, which is really how we think of our staff that are housed in the Nature Conservancy. So this new plan is really not about APIP. It's not about what the 5 of us are going to do. It's really about what collectively is going to happen here in the region. And so the new plan is set up to have a vision and mission and goals that all of our partners are already involved in and can engage in. And as I said, we're going to talk about whether we can build a dashboard that will be able to allow us to collectively roll up all of our work to see what's happening, because it's the work of all the partners that really moves invasive species mitigation forward in the Adirondacks. The APIP staff, we do a lot, but it's only one piece of the overall puzzle. So as I said, there's a vision and a mission and the goals, and you can see a lot of that on the strategic plan. There's a site on our website as well, and we also have a quick 2-pager that summarizes this. But again, we have this, some things are changed with this new strategic plan. Again, it's been about a decade. So we know that we're not going to prevent invasive species from coming into the Adirondack. So the vision is really about minimizing the impacts of the invasive species and making sure they're not significantly degrading our landscape, and really trying to increase the efforts to get more people engaged in invasive species work. I'm really very hopeful, and especially based on our last 20 years of history, that we're going to continue to have in the Adirondacks native species thriving. Our communities are going to be involved in invasive species work, and we will be helping to make sure that this region serves as that resilient place during climate migration. So our mission, there's a new revised mission again for this larger partnership, is to minimize the impact of invasive species, not just on our lands and waters, but on our communities as well. Certainly our recreational communities, the infrastructure for our transportation agencies, all of that is so important. So there are 4 goals in the plan. I'm not going to read them all. It's protecting our lands, protecting our waters, building our strong communities, and engaging in research. This replaces 12 goals in the old plan. So I'm really hoping that since it's simplified, each one of you on the phone today can already look at this slide and think about, oh yeah, I do that. That's where I fit in. The whole idea of this new plan is a way for you to be able to see how your work rolls up to what's happening across the Adirondacks. So as I said, there's the work of our partners, and then there's the work of APIP staff. So the plan does go into more detail about what the APIP staff are going to do. And it really starts with this focus on the species tier system. So if you're not familiar with that, I think there's some information in the plan itself and on our website, but it's basically looking at the species abundance, the species impact, and the ability to be able to eradicate those species. So for the things that we consider tier 2, not very threatening, not very many of them in the park, possibilities to contain or eradicate, that's where we're going to put most of our management efforts. We're going to put prevention efforts on all of our species, tier 1 through 4. Our monitoring is also through tier 1 through 4, but our management is really focused on tier 2 and to somewhat on tier 3. We have a lot of community engagement, and again, we have the opportunity to work with all of you. One of the things we want to be able to do is provide the information that you need. So many of you use the Protect Your Waters and Protect Your Forest posters and brochures and Don't Move Firewood. We have the new terrestrial guide. We also have best management practices on our website. If you have things that you think should be shared broadly with the Adirondack community in terms of how to manage invasive species, we can probably find a home for it on our website and help distribute it. And then as our kind of final goal is the research and innovation work. There's one more piece of the APIP work though, which is to manage sort of the overall administration of the PRISM, which includes the Nature Conservancy's contract with DEC, as well as being able to host these meetings and keep us all connected. So there's a few new pieces to the plan. I've talked a lot about the fact that we have only 4 goals. We're really focusing on the partnership. We did formalize some partnership operating principles. And so our partners, for those of you that we know who a lot of you are who are really engaged, but we have defined partners in the plan, and then in a separate set of operating principles, we've pulled those out, and those are on our website too. But what we want to do is we want to ask our partners to attend at least one of our partner meetings a year, to contribute data to this dashboard, or participate in one of our working groups, or be involved in an invasive species project. And in return for that, our partners, hopefully we're enabling you to stay connected with others who are doing this kind of work. We hope we're providing expertise and sharing expertise amongst us, and then recognizing the partners on our website and in our annual report. Moving forward, if an organization isn't actively engaged in one of the ways that are identified in number 2, we'll be dropping those organizations off of our website and off of our public listing of partners. There are a few that in the 3 years I've been doing this work, I haven't heard from yet. So we will be we'll be adding new partners to our website, because there's some of you on the phone and that we work with regularly that we haven't been able to recognize, and a few others that are not active that will be dropping off. The partnership operating principles also define our volunteers. Now that seems sort of silly, like why do you have to define volunteers? But this is in terms, when we get to this dashboard, the idea is that in this case, we're defining volunteers as those volunteers who are working on APIP projects and who have signed the agreements with the Nature Conservancy, any liabilities or risk waivers. This is our Lake Protectors program, our forest pest hunters. And our volunteers hopefully get a lot of it, hopefully satisfaction, sometimes not enjoyment, out of being out monitoring for invasive species. Hopefully we're increasing their knowledge, and we do like to recognize our volunteers too. So if you are a lake association and you have a lot of volunteers, I think about Scroon Lake Association, they have a lot of volunteers. The volunteers for Scroon Lake Association, as we think about this dashboard, will be rolling up into Scroon Lake Association's overall accomplishments for the season, and that's where they'd be showing up. So when we think about volunteers, there's lots of volunteers for all of our partner organizations. We're simply trying to track those ones who are working directly with TNC. So with hopefully not much further ado, we're going to turn over to this dashboard, which is also new in this plan. And so lots of uses of the term dashboard. So we'll just kind of set the stage for what we're talking about here. We want to have one way to capture some data, pretty simple data, and to display the information about all the work that's happening across the Adirondack Park with all of our partners. And to do that, we're going to need some standardized indicators and some common reporting systems. That's going to be hard because how do you define an event? How do you define a participant? How do you define research? Well, we're going to take a stab at that. And the idea is that for the most part, to start with, we're going to be looking at a snapshot of time. So unlike some interactive live data dashboards that you can see if you have ArcGIS and other programs where you can just sort of track things live as they're happening, we're going to try to put together a dashboard that will capture a snapshot in time, usually to start with an annual reporting period. And then eventually, if we have lots of great data, we can also build some more online analytics. I do have two examples of what these kind of dashboards can look like. And then I'm going to turn it over to Zach to talk more specifically about what one in the Adirondacks could look like. So the organization that I previously worked for was the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, a national program that accredits land conservation groups around the country. And so after every round of issuing accreditation awards to different land trusts, we were able to update this graphic figure. So how many accredited land trusts there were, and how much of all of the protected land in the country that they had protected. We were aiming to eventually get about 90% of all protected land in the country held by an accredited land trust. And as of March of this year, we were inching towards that goal. And so these were just some statistics that could be regularly updated. How many conservation easements, how many miles of trails. And then in terms, we also were able to talk about what's happening in those organizations. How many of those land trusts had full-time staff? How many of them were all volunteers? So people could kind of see where their organizations fit. The idea here is not to know anything about land trusts. The idea is that you could go on to the Accreditation Commission's website at any point in time, find out how many accredited land trusts there were, how much land had been protected, and kind of the demographics of those organizations. So we'd like to do something similar to be able to reflect the work on those 4 goals that we talked about for not just what the Nature Conservancy and the APIP staff are doing, but what's happening across the park. So Zach, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to approve screen sharing for you.
Sorry, I went to approve my share. I couldn't unmute myself. So yeah, I'm just going to provide a quick context and overview about some thoughts related to an Adirondack Prism specific partner dashboard. So overall, really our goal here is to create a centralized database, if you will, or a location where we can aggregate and roll up all of the collective efforts that are currently underway by our partners. I think historically for the Prism and the partnership, we have understood and recognized that there's a lot of great work going on out there, but we haven't been so good about collecting that and reporting it away so that we can all see the efforts of each organization within the partnership. So we hope that this is something that will be easy to share both online and in print. And in longer term, Tamara mentioned that this would begin as just a snapshot in time, but longer term, we hope to be able to display progress over time, specifically towards the goals and objectives in our strategic plan. And while this seems like a pretty simple concept at the surface, there are some challenges associated with the development of the dashboard. So first and foremost, the indicators have to be easy to measure. And we recognize that although we are all doing pretty similar work in the world of invasive species, we might not be measuring our work in the same way. And for these indicators to be uniform, we do have to be collecting the same type of information in the same manner. So to start out, this will likely be very high level and basic, and we will start by including metrics that we think everyone is currently collecting in a pretty standardized fashion. We hope that the data input for this will be easy. If it's not, that is a significant challenge. We do not want your contribution to the dashboard to be a project in and of itself. It's something that we hope will be simple and quick. And to facilitate that, we're currently in the process of developing an online survey to help capture partner effort. I'll share a little bit more about that later on. And finally, and this is particularly important as we begin to think about reporting progress over time, it is important that partners consistently report their efforts to this collective dashboard. So why does this matter? So for example, I'm not singling anyone out, but I'm going to use AWI as an example because they do a lot of work. So let's say that AWI reports in 2022 that they've monitored 20 lakes. That effort goes to the dashboard. It's displayed to the partnership. 2023 rolls around, and we all get busy, and oops, forgot to report efforts that year to the dashboard, despite the fact that a lot of work happened on the ground. So in our trends over time, this may reflect that less work is being done, although it's actually happening, it's just not being reported. So consistent contribution to the dashboard will be important, and that's why we're going to make it so easy to report what you're doing with this online survey. So moving forward, we're going to start small and simple, some very high level metrics. And then as we kind of build this foundation, there will be opportunity to incorporate more complex statistics and metrics in the future. So I'm going to go through some examples, and these are tied to the goals of the strategic plan, the 4 goals. These are just for the purpose of illustration. Nothing here is set in stone, but it's just meant to kind of help paint a picture for the types of things we may capture or display in this collective dashboard. So in the world of terrestrial invasive species, we may ask simple questions like, what are the species your program or partner are managing? What are you monitoring for? And we can use this to display simple statistics like how many different species are being managed in the region, how many species are being monitored. We can infer, what is the species of most interest to our partners? In other words, what's getting the most attention? This can help us craft education outreach messages that are specific to those species of interest. And over time, we can kind of see how the focal species in the region change. Similarly, for aquatics, second goal of our strategic plan, we can think about the number of lakes that are being surveyed by each partner each year. And more specifically, we may ask, what species are people looking for within those lakes? We may also consider what species are being managed and where. And we can use this information to calculate some statistics, such as the percentage of surveyed lakes free of AIS or invaded by AIS, and the number of newly invaded lakes each year. So just some examples of metrics that we may capture. Related to goal 3, or community engagement, of course, is things like how many events are being held throughout the region by various partners that incorporate messaging surrounding invasive species. And in association with that, how many people attended those events. And lastly, goal 4, research and innovation. We may ask, how many different types of research projects your organization is involved with. And based on responses, can kind of bin these out to get an understanding of what types of research people are engaged with, whether that's something like a prevention-related research project, research into control, such as our knotweed project we highlighted earlier, and so on. And just to provide a little context and what we're thinking about as far as a timeline for the development of this type of dashboard, we're currently in the process of developing an online survey that can be used to capture partners' efforts. We hope to wrap this up very soon, because in January, we hope to share the survey with a small group, maybe 4 to 6 partners, to be sort of our guinea pigs and our beta testers. We'll have them input some information into that survey, and we'll use their feedback to refine it and make it a little bit more user-friendly. We'll send that refined survey in February to a larger group of pilot testers, probably 15 to 20 partners, and ask them to submit their 2022 field season data, which we will use to generate a draft visualization around March or April in the spring of 2022. From there, we'll share the refined survey with the full partnership so that folks can get an understanding of what types of information we'll be asking you to report following the end of the 2023 field season. So in the winter of 2023, when everyone's wrapping up all their annual reports, they can easily submit their year-end metrics to the survey, which will allow us to produce a full visualization in 2024.
All right, thanks, Zach. We're going to have some questions for you all about this. And as we get into that, though, I just wanted to also give a couple of examples to share, to add on to what Zach said. So as we were going through the strategic planning process, Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District was talking about the work they had been doing to control knotweed. Well, we count up all the knotweed work that we do and report it in our annual report, but there's no place where we're aggregating what our partners like Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District are doing. Similarly, we know that there are a lot of lakes managing Eurasian water milfoil, a lot of lake associations in the Adirondack Park. There's no one place, though, where you could actually find out how many lakes in the Adirondacks are actually being actively managed to remove Eurasian water milfoil. Likewise, when you saw that slide about, the events, we know a lot about what AWI is doing or what APIP is doing, but we know groups like Lake George Association are also holding events all summer long. And there's no place, again, which rolls all of that up. And so that's some of what we're trying to do here. But we don't know if this is something that you would want to do. So I'm going to launch my first poll. The question is, how likely would your organization be to add data? Sounds like pretty likely so far. Some unlikelies. Unsure. Okay. All right, looks like we're about steady with answers there. I'll end the poll and share the results there. So question for you, you can pop off mute or you can pop a note in the chat. If you are unlikely or unsure, what's the, if you're willing to share a little bit about why you're not sure or why you wouldn't contribute data. Maybe you don't have any data to contribute. Throw a note in the chat or pop yourself off mute. Anyone who was unlikely or unsure?
I can add to that. This is Jim Panero from Adirondack Park Agency. So I clicked unsure because primarily our agency is zoning and regulatory in nature. So we're not actively doing these control projects, but rather regulating them. So it would be difficult for us to find a certain metric from the examples that you provided. Maybe there's a different metric that we could contribute to.
That's an excellent point, Jim, and thanks for popping on and thanks for being on the call today. If those of you who haven't met Jim, he is working and doing some of the work, I think I understand, Jim, that Lee Walrath was doing at APA, in addition to other duties as well. So I know that APA has in the past done some lake surveys and lake monitoring. So that is a place where APA's data would be able to be rolled up. But that is a great question. It may be that some of the work that you're doing doesn't directly contribute to these metrics, but it doesn't mean it's not effective and not an important part of our overall efforts here. Others about unlikely or unsure? Go ahead, pop off mute. Yeah, okay, so that's an interesting question on the regulatory role. So I saw that coming in the chat about DEC also playing a regulatory role. That's something for us to think about in terms of whether we want to be able to add something so that that regulatory piece can be represented in some way. I'm not sure yet, but we'll have to think about that because we want this to be something that everybody can feel part of. Anything else on the unlikely or unsure? Okay. You'll have a chance to, you can definitely contribute more if you want. next question I have for you is we've been, as Zach said, we're developing a form. And at this point, we have not been able to find freely accessible technology that allows us to have different computers adding to one form. So that would mean if you are Schroon Lake Association and you wanted 3 different committee members to add data to the form, somebody would have to take responsibility for putting that, all of that in for one organization. You wouldn't be able to have, you know, Mark in one place entering data, and Neil in another place entering data, and Ev in another place entering data. You would have to be able to have one person enter the data. We'd have a downloadable version of it so people could know what the questions are, but just trying to see how big a limit that would be for some folks. Again, if we could come up with freely available technology, we would, but we haven't solved that yet. So a couple of folks unsure, and at least for one organization, oops, sorry, I got to end the poll so you can see the results. Sorry. Yeah, so it looks like at least 31 responses, 1 out of 15 responses there. It looks like, at least for one organization, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. If you have thoughts on that particular question, I think you can just go ahead and drop that one in the chat. I've got a couple more questions for you though, so let's see. So we've been trying to figure out, if we do this, the idea would be that we would put an online form on the website, on our website, or we can send it to you, the link to you, and groups would fill it in. Again, as Zach said, we're hoping this is not really hard. You know, it's going to be pretty simple to start with. How many events did you have? How many people were there? If you do events, if you don't do events, you just go through NA and don't answer those boxes. If you're not doing management, you don't answer those boxes. If you are actively, if you're DEC and you have field foresters out surveying for hemlock woolly adelgid, we'd love to know that. So you click yes on those boxes and nothing else. So we'd love to know though about when the right time of year would be to get this data. As we said, we're going to try and aggregate the data at least once a year. So is this the type of data that you would have available in January or February or maybe March, and then we skip ahead to either November for the, you know, your summer field season, or December, or sort of no preference? You know, I know at least for the APIP team, we were delighted to have our fall, what used to be our fall partner meeting in December, December 1st this year, not just because it's snowing, but because it gave us a couple extra weeks to pull together all of our data, because it's awfully hard to get all that summer data together. So we kind of have some no preference, some folks who are going to be needing to do it early in the year, some folks who would have it ready by year end. And you all getting a couple more answers before I end the poll and put that up there. Okay. Oops. A little bit more. Okay. All right. I think we're kind of steady there. All right. So it looks like there would be some folks who would have data ready by December, some folks who have no preference, and a lot of folks who would have that data ready by January and maybe February at the, you know, kind of at the outer end. Asking for data in November doesn't look like that's going to work particularly well. So we will take note of that. And again, certainly use the chat if you have other questions or things about that. Now, this is perhaps the most, I think, I should have put this as the first question, but before we got too far with this, and I know we've had, you know, maybe half of the folks on the call responding to these, but do you think this is something that's important? How much effort should we all be putting into this? Just curious about whether you think this would be valuable, and not, it's really about valuable to you and valuable to your organization. And it's okay to say not sure or not at all. It really is. The responses are anonymous. haven't been able, so, well, looks like I've got about 19, 20 answers so far, a little bit more. Okay. So I think we're stable there. Let me end the poll and share the results. Okay. So it looks like we have some folks who are not sure. Nobody was brave enough to say not at all. But really sort of split there between the very and the somewhat. So as I said, you know, I've kind of done a lot of talking, and it's really hard to facilitate a conversation with 36 of us on the line. But I am curious, just come off mute if you will, or offer any thoughts you have, because this will be an effort to, you'll get a lot of emails from us looking for data. So thoughts, just general thoughts about whether this is worth pursuing, whether you think it's not worth pursuing, or whether you're not sure how you would use it. Anyone want to start? Trying to see if there's anything over in chat either. Sorry, I didn't share the results. There we go. So again, the results are a little bit 50-50. Let's see here. Just out of curiosity. So I could call on someone. Trying to see who's on there.
I'll just say, as part of a smaller lake association, I just think it would be so helpful as everyone's kind of grappling with this and figuring it out, sort of lake by lake basis, what the progress is in different areas and how to monitor that. And just, it just seems like such an easier way to kind of get a grasp of what's happening throughout the park so that you don't feel so kind of isolated. I think lakes, just coming into this as part of the Blue Mountain Lake Association, you know, it's such an overwhelming thing when you first find out you have an invasive, and it would just be great to have a dashboard like that where you can see other areas that are dealing with different invasives and just how successful or not successful management is.
Yeah, I think that's a really great addition there, because it is true that, you know, you can use one of our interactive maps on the APIP website that will tell you whether a lake is invaded or not invaded. And, you know, you can call Brian and find out how many lake associations we've worked with this year and how many, you know, are kind of on our email list. But there's not a good place to be able to say, here's the lake associations that are dealing with an active invasion right now, and then to be able to connect to who's actually doing the management, so you could have a peer network. So that's okay. That's a way that this could be used. Curious about some of the larger lake associations. I mean, you're kind of doing your own thing on your own lake. Would it be helpful to have that connection to what's happening with the larger Adirondacks, or are you mostly focused on your own lake? Anyone want to comment on that? So, well, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Tara. So not a lake association, but
No,
but
okay.
but just thinking about just thinking for a moment about dashboards. I mean, I personally really appreciate them. I think what's interesting, I think, and could be helpful to us is that, you know, this represents the whole, right? Which is one thing that I think it's really good. I think it's progress over time to show like what's our goals that we had come up with, and then where are we, and kind of showing that progress. And it could be positive or not, and that's okay, because it's information, right? So we can adapt or whatever. So I think that's helpful. But I was also thinking, like, what's behind those numbers, the stories that go with that, and then how do we use as a group, you know, how do we use that when it comes to the work that we do either as a whole or as individuals, and then also how do we how do we use that to advocate for, I mean, honestly, like funding and support and all that, which I think is, a constant, right? Because there's a lot of needs out there in the world. And I think this is just one way I think that we can kind of, keep on our game and keep that fresh and keep it in the forefront. So yeah.
Yeah, I do hope that this idea that it could help with funding, right? As organizations are seeking grant funding to be able to say, we're part of this larger whole, we're part of the Adirondack Prism, we want to do our part. And so this work is not just happening in our lake or on our acreage, it's happening as part of a larger 6.6 million acre effort with 30 other groups. And I do love the idea of the stories. I think that is important. And that's the hard part about being on Zoom, because we can't sit down and tell stories. But hopefully we'll do a little bit more of that in our February roundtables. So thanks for those thoughts, Bill. Other thoughts on how you might be able to use this, or whether it would be valuable to you? We don't want to go through the effort if it won't be valuable to you. And I have one, I think, last poll to come up. So as Zach put up that timeline, we do want to have, we want to have a little bit of beta testing of that form. And we also then would hope to have 15 or 20 groups be able to, once we work the bugs out of the form, actually be able to complete the form, so we could do a mock-up of this and really see whether there's a benefit to everyone. So, and we can follow up. So
Tamara, this is confident or anonymous, right? So if you're answering yes, could you say who you are in the chat?
yes, that would help. You're answering yes. Let Zach know, because he's going to be trying to pull together the testing. So far we got about 7 groups. And there are some of our partners who are not on the call today, and we know how to get a hold of them. All right, I think we're stable there. So looks like we have about 7 of the groups who responded that would be able to do that. And I completely understand too that as I heard when we first started discussing this, that there are organizations that are part and parcel of this work, the work that APA does, the work that DEC does, the work that all of our partners do, but you might not see how it fits into a dashboard. So you wouldn't necessarily have data to contribute in this pilot phase. I definitely understand that, and that doesn't make the work less valuable. On my screen, I'm looking at Tom Algeier right now with Department of Ag and Markets, who we don't talk about enough, I don't think, but Tom's work has been instrumental in all of the spotted lanternfly outreach and providing us with the traps that we use to be able to monitor for spotted lanternfly, to be able to send inspectors up if there's been a live or a dead individual spotted lanternfly found. So all of that effort is really important, and some of that, as we've currently envisioned it, might not fit into the dashboard, but I think maybe we have to rethink some of that. All right, go ahead, Tom. I see you come off mute. I know.
Sorry, I was going to say, well, some of the data would be difficult to include also if it was in regulatory in nature, depending on the location of the find. So if it was at a DOT rest area, that would be one thing, but if it was at a private establishment or a private property, we would not be able to release that data. So there's always a regulatory concern with us.
Right, that is true too. And There's also work that Ag Markets does that doesn't show up in places that is also regulatory in nature. We'll probably talk about this when we get to our spring native plants workshop, but I know it's at least once a year I'm getting a hold of Tom in the spring and saying, I found a nursery, it's selling regulated plants, it's not supposed to be doing that, or it's selling prohibited plants. And Ag Market sends its inspectors up to make sure that their nurseries around the state are actually following the law and not selling prohibited and regulated plants. So lots of different ways our partners are involved. Let's see.
Tamara,
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
encourage anyone finding plants that are, on the regulated or prohibited list that are either not labeled or prohibited plants for sale to, either just contact me directly or go through Tamara. But yeah, we can't be everywhere all at once, but there's lots of other eyes and ears out there. So much appreciated.
All right. We're about ready to wrap up today. We can get you off to your lunch a little bit early, but if you do have questions or comments, I welcome anyone popping off mute and sharing any comments. We'll stay on the line a little bit longer. And I just really kind of circling back to how I started this call today. It takes all of us to make a difference in the Adirondacks. So you got to hear some of what's happened with our Nature Conservancy staff this summer and some of what our other partners are doing, but all of you are doing amazing work, and together we are absolutely making a difference. And so I'm delighted to move forward with this new strategic plan for the entire partnership for the entire Adirondack Rhythm starting early next year. So thanks, everybody. And again, feel free to jump off mute and chat if you want. And others of you who need to get off the line, you can just drop off. Thanks, everyone.
Tamara, I'll add in a quick thing if other people are on the line. Well, the dashboard is kind of a new version of this. APIP has a long history of working together to collect data across the Prism. And so I don't know if there's anybody who's still on here who was involved, must be like at least almost 10 years ago, but APIP did our economic study. I think it came out in 2013, and also the white paper for the boat steward or the watercraft inspection where we collected data. I think those are two good examples of where we collectively got everybody together. We collected a lot of data, and then we were able to use that to advocate for better resources and better regulations for the region. And so those were kind of one-off projects. So that maybe the difference about this is it's a little bit more ongoing or forward thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for that, because those papers were really important. And I know if we are thinking about moving ahead, our contract with the New York State DEC ends at the end of 2023. But if we go forward with a new contract, I'm certainly interested in what some of those collective projects might be, and some of those kind of new research projects as well. Other thoughts for those of you who are on the line?
I just want to jump in, and I know a lot of our regulatory partners need to kind of run this up the chain of command before they could move forward with a dashboard. And there may be questions as that happens, feel free to reach out to us. And, one thing I wanted to mention too is, on the terrestrial and aquatic sides, one thing we're going to do is we're going to send you a list of species, and you're going to just mark a radial button if you surveyed it, if you found it, if you reported it, or you managed it. So we're not collecting any locational information or that sort of thing. It's really straightforward.
Yeah, we'll be starting out pretty simple. I think some people will be like, oh, great, we're going to see all this great data spread out across the landscape. We do think it'll be pretty simple to start with. And we haven't yet tested the form to see how long it would take. But this is not, as Zach said, this is not something that should become a project in and of itself. Other thoughts or questions about our work together? All right, well, I want to do a shout out to all of this start off with to all of the great APIP staff team on this call today. And then a shout out to all of our partners. Oh, it's so fun to see all of you who are on this call have had a chance to work with so many of you over the course of the summer. So thanks for all of your great work. We look forward to being able to work with you again next year. And I hope we get enough snow to go ski. Thanks, everybody.
Good to see everybody. Thank you.